Haitian police fire in the air as mourners gather for the funerals of slain protesters. Cuba's president is greeted with full honors in Mexico City. And Venezuela has been elected to the UN Human Rights Council despite a campaign against the country. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is From the South. Funerals in Haiti quickly turned to heated protests when police fired air shots at hundreds of mourners in an attempt to stop a funeral procession near the presidential palace. A protest broke out when presidential guards tried to block a road near where hundreds had gathered around the coffins of two victims who had died in the past weeks of demonstrations. A group of mourners retaliated by setting a vehicle on fire, and police responded by firing dozens of rounds as most of the crowd took cover. The injured were taken to hospitals. Funerals for 11 of at least 20 people killed were held in various cities, including the capital of Port-au-Prince. Protesters forced Haiti's president to hold a private ceremony to commemorate the death of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, one of the country's founding fathers. Hundreds of armed police officers locked down the surrounding area while protesters who demanded President Jovenel Moïse's resignation began to assemble. Demonstrators had prevented Moïse from visiting the site where Dessalines was killed and where a public ceremony is usually held. Before leaving the private venue, President Moïse spoke briefly with the media, indicating that he is making moves to end his country's corrupt political and economic system, as he urged unity and dialogue with the opposition.
I am calling on Haitians need to unite to fight this system.
The longer Jovenel Moïse stays in power, the angrier the younger generation is getting. One day we will get Jovenel Moïse at the National Palace.
Moving on, the Cuban president Miguel DiazCanel is in Mexico for an official visit. The Cuban president and his wife were welcomed by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador at the National Palace in Mexico City. After the welcoming ceremony, the two leaders went into a closed-door meeting. Before the meeting, DiazCanel said the government of Mexico has shared decades of friendship with the people and the government of Cuba, and that Cuba is interested in working with Mexico on projects that benefit both countries. The Mexican president also said he welcomed the visit.
We will continue to strengthen our relations and forge policies in keeping with the tradition of respect for the Cuban people, their independence and their right to self-governance. This has been our mandate, and this is what is written in our Constitution.
Campaigning has come to a close in Bolivia ahead of Sunday's presidential election. President Evo Morales, who is seeking another term, held his final rally in El Alto outside of La Paz. Morales remains the favorite to win on Sunday, and he may score a victory in the first round. The opposition is divided between 8 candidates and has said it will not recognize a victory by the president.
I want to tell you all that in these elections, we'll once again beat those who want to sell out the homeland. We'll beat the neoliberals. Sisters and brothers, we'll beat those who want to privatize our natural resources.
Our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, has more on the election preparations.
The situation here in La Paz ahead of the elections is very calm. No problems are being reported in the delivery of the election materials to the voting centres. This process began at the beginning of the week to reach the most remote rural areas and ensure that everyone can cast their ballot on Sunday. The Electoral Tribunal has had meetings with various delegates from international observer missions. More than 230 election experts from around the world are taking part to accompany the vote. They will be present not only in the 9 departmental capitals, in the main cities, but also in rural communities. And the Electoral Tribunal is giving a lot of importance to this. You will remember that for the first time, these elections are using a voter registration that has been audited by the Organization of American States. That was something that the opposition was demanding for several years, and now is being put into practice. for the first time. Of course, the opposition now says it doesn't trust the work done by the OAS. More than 20,000 members of the armed forces and police will be deployed at all of the 15,000 or more voting centres to ensure security from midnight on Wednesday. All kinds of campaign propaganda have been forbidden from all 9 candidates hoping to be elected president for the next period. On Sunday, voters will also elect members of the Senate and lower house, also for a period of 5 years.
Moving on, Venezuela has been elected as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council for the next 3 years. There were celebrations at the UN General Assembly as Venezuela won with 105 votes. The Assembly chose 14 new members for the Council, which is made up of 47 countries. They will take up their seats in January. For Latin America and the Caribbean, Brazil and Costa Rica were also elected. The foreign minister said Venezuela wants to make a serious contribution.
We have a serious, rigorous plan that we want to contribute to the multilateral human rights system of the United Nations, both in the Council and the Office of the High Commissioner. We have signed an agreement with Michelle Bachelet. Her team is here in Venezuela, and we want to avoid greater violations, avoid countries being blockaded and sanctioned or bombarded. We want to avoid the violations caused by economic inequality in the world, because the capitalist system that has been imposed on us is based on hunger, on the poverty of the majority, so that a minority can live in prosperity and material abundance. Venezuela will be there in the next 3 years, 2020, 2021 and 2022, in the Human Rights Council.
Talks are continuing between the Venezuelan government and sectors of the opposition. One of the main issues on the agenda is the preparation of elections next year, but the far right in the National Assembly seems to be blocking the process.
The anti-democratic opposition in Venezuela's National Assembly repeats endlessly that they want presidential elections as the culmination of the adventure they embarked on when Juan Guaidó declared himself president. They've told the world this is the only solution for Venezuela.
Presidential and parliamentary elections at the same time set the date and will nominate a new electoral council.
It is a contradictory demand, because time marches on and they won't even discuss the election of a new electoral council. This is a necessary step towards legislative elections, which are the only ones contemplated in the Constitution for next year.
Everyone in Venezuela can see what they're doing. If they refuse to act, we will denounce them publicly for not seeking solutions. The PSUV group took a positive step by rejoining the Assembly. Now they need to step up so that we can elect a new CNE. If not, the Supreme Court will have to step in and take the decision.
The parliamentary committee that should be discussing the preparations for elections is the one chaired by Stalin Gonzalez, second vice president of the National Assembly. But he hasn't turned up in recent days. He was caught on camera in the United States and at a baseball game in Washington.
Everyone in Venezuela can see what they're doing. If they refuse to act, we will denounce them publicly for not seeking solutions. The PSUV group took a positive step by rejoining the Assembly. Now they need to step up so that we can elect a new CNE. If not, the Supreme Court will have to step in and take the decision.
Before a new electoral council can be elected, the National Assembly needs to overcome its breach of the Constitution by removing the candidates who were elected through fraud, then reach an agreement between the opposition and the Chavistas. But the body language doesn't look good.
This shows how fragmented the different opposition currents are. Some of them just want to keep their seats in the Assembly. Others are only interested in getting rid of the president.
Very soon, we will have elections for the National Assembly, and then we'll see if the imperialists will let their servile lackeys of the right take part or not. We are ready for the elections because the Venezuelan revolution is democratic, constitutional, and rests on the will of the people.
Meanwhile, talks are advancing with democratic and non-violent sectors of the opposition. A working group has been set up to draw up proposals for a new National Electoral Council and to discuss election safeguards and a system of proportional representation for minority parties.
Coming up, Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister explains that the country's foreign exchange problems cannot be resolved anytime soon. More after the break. Welcome back to From the South. People in Ecuador are waiting to hear the outcome of another round of talks between indigenous leaders and the government. The meeting on Wednesday was held behind closed doors and no results have yet been released. It was set to discuss the content of a new decree to replace Decree 883, which removed fuel subsidies and triggered a huge uprising in protest. One of the indigenous leaders, Leonidas Isa, reportedly told the government that any new decree would have to be based on a completely different model of development. Just days after the nationwide protests ended in Ecuador, one of the country's unions is threatening to reignite demonstrations, this time against labor reforms. Our correspondent, Denise Herrera, reports from Quito.
Hello, we are at the historic center of Quito, where recently one of the organizations of workers, the food, just announced a new demonstration against the labor reforms. They said that the government didn't accept to talk with all the sectors of workers, and they continue their actions against the labor reforms. They also said that they would discuss the situation with other sectors of workers. Under this situation, the CONAIE and the government just talked yesterday, and they said that they will continue discussing these issues, the labor reforms and the economic measures. They said that they would talk with different sectors also to find a final resolution.
Moving on, Guyana's High Court has thrown out an application filed by the opposition for an order mandating that the cabinet, including the president, resigns. In delivering the ruling, the acting Chief Justice deemed the opposition's action wholly misconceived, vexatious, and an absolute abuse of the court. The CJ order cost to the respondent in the sum of $500,000 Guyanese, which is about $2,400 US. The president has set March 2nd, 2020 for the holding of elections. The cabinet has continued in office as a caretaker government since the passage of a no-confidence motion against the government last December. The High Court struck down the opposition's claim that the Caribbean Court Justice had overlooked a compulsory order compelling the president to resign. Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has explained that the country's foreign exchange problems cannot be resolved anytime soon. Speaking just over a week after his government delivered a $53 billion budget, he said Forex remains a challenge.
We have to manage our consumption of foreign exchange, because if we spend it out and cannot earn it back, then that's a kind of bankruptcy, which makes us a pariah in the international financial community, which is why the yardstick is that you need to have enough foreign exchange for 3 months cover. That means and you're on the edge there, on the margin. If you go below 3 months, well, you're technically in big trouble. If you're just above it, that's not comfortable enough. We had up to 9 to 12 months cover when we had a lot of cash, earning a lot of cash, high oil price and so on, high gas price. But we don't have high oil price, we don't have high gas price.
So how many months cover do you have now?
We have about 7.5 months cover, which is well above the level of 3 months, which is the yardstick. We were told by some of the experts who sought to advise us when we came into office that we would have, if we did not devalue the currency to 8 to 1 or 10 to 1, we would, in paying our bills and managing our affairs, we would use up that foreign exchange reserve that we have inside of a year.
Jamaica Senate has approved 90-day extensions of the state of public emergencies across 5 parishes. This means that the special security measure will now end in January 2020 in Westmoreland, Hanover, St. James, Clarendon, and St. Catherine. The government says since the implementation of the measure in Clarendon 6 weeks ago, murders have declined by 80%. The Prime Minister is holding anti-crime talks with the opposition and civil society groups.
And approved an extension of the state.
A Guinea court has suspended the trial of 8 opposition leaders accused of organizing protests against the president, Alpha Conde. The 8 leaders were arrested on Saturday and charged with making statements to disturb public order by calling for demonstrations. At least 9 people were killed in 3 days of protests against the president's push for constitutional reform, which is seen as a way for him to seek a 3rd term in office. South Africa was hit by power cuts for a 2nd day on Thursday as state utility Eskom said a number of generating units were still out of service. Eskom noted that some of the units will not be up and running for a few days, and as a result, the utility said it would cut 2,000 megawatts of power from 7 a.m. until 11 p.m. local time on a rotational basis across the country. On Wednesday, the rand fell as much as 1% against the U.S. dollar as the outages highlighted the challenges facing the country's economy. The cuts also affected supplies to Zimbabwe, where Eskom exports up to 400 MV daily. Stakeholders in Mozambique have expressed concern that reports of voting irregularities in Tuesday's polls could lead to an outbreak of violence. Opposition parties and civil society groups have accused the ruling party of engaging in electoral malpractices, such as stuffing ballot boxes and chasing observers from polling stations. According to the police, 17 people have been arrested on suspicion of attempting to interfere with vote counting in 10 polling stations in the central province of Zambezia. While the election was generally conducted in a peaceful manner, sporadic cases of violence were reported in Shai district, where an election observer was killed during clashes between government and opposition supporters. Our correspondent Matuba Malachi has more on this election.
Election observers in Mozambique say these elections that took place on Tuesday were largely free and fair, and they say that the minor hiccups that took place during this election period are not enough to influence the final outcome of the results we expect to see on Friday. But this election came at a very costly price, and that is human life. In the northern parts of Mozambique, we saw at least 200 people reported dead because of the insurgency that's been reoccurring in that part of the country. But for the election period, we understand that 200 people have been killed, and this has had an impact on people who live there because there were no polling stations sent to the northern parts of Mozambique, fearing insurgency and more violence. But now, with the election results expected on Friday, we expect Frelimo to extend its long-time rule of the country. President Filipe Nyusi will most likely be in office for another term as the Renamo opposition party trails behind with votes according to the preliminary results that we've seen recently. And a healthy democracy in Mozambique means stability for the SADC region, but then it remains to be seen how President Filipe Nyusi deals with the insurgency that is still ongoing in the northern parts of Mozambique. It's back to you, studio.
Coming up, Turkey agrees to suspend its military operations in northern Syria. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Turkey has agreed to suspend its military operations in northern Syria to let Kurdish-led forces withdraw. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence made the announcement after he and high-level delegation held talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara. Coming out of that five-hour-long meeting, Pence said there will be a pause in military operations for 5 days. Once the Kurdish forces have permanently left, Turkey says it will implement a permanent ceasefire. The U.S. will withdraw recent sanctions it imposed on Turkey.
We will pause Operation Peace Spring in order to allow for the withdrawal of PKK-YPG forces from the safe zone for 120 hours. Not a ceasefire. We are only pausing. This is not a ceasefire. Ceasefires can be done only between two legitimate sides. We are only pausing the operation to allow the terrorist groups, which are the targets of the operation, withdrawal from the safe zone.
And the Russian flag was seen flying on a demolished building in Sor Magar, a border town in Syria, which Kurdish militant groups controlled before the Turkish military offensive. Earlier on Thursday, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman said Syria should get control over its border with Turkey as part of any settlement in the conflict in the region. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has hammered out a last-minute Brexit deal, but he will now have to win approval for the draft deal in the British Parliament in a rare sitting scheduled for Saturday. Johnson is currently in Brussels, Belgium for an EU summit where the exit of the United Kingdom has topped the agenda. The deal still has to be approved by all 27 member countries and the British Parliament, although key allies and the opposition Labour Party have spoken out against the deal struck with the EU. Johnson has expressed confidence that the Parliament would support it.
This is a day when the Prime Minister seems to have made a deal with the European Union which doesn't give us the complete freedom of movement between Britain and Northern Ireland because it creates a customs union border down the Irish Sea. And secondly, it does nothing to deal with all the concerns that we've raised during Theresa May's premiership and his about a race to the bottom in rights and protections. And we believe the deal he's proposed is heading Britain in the direction of a deregulated society with a sell-off of national assets to American corporations. So as it stands, we cannot support this deal and will oppose it in Parliament on Saturday. And it also is unclear if he has the support of his allies in the DUP or indeed many of his allies on his own backbenches.
Thousands of Catalan students have taken to the streets in Barcelona in a fourth day of protest against the jail sentences handed out to independence leaders. After 3 nights of severe police repression against the protesters, Thursday's march was largely peaceful. 97 protesters have been arrested since Monday, and the regional Catalan government has condemned the violence by protesters. However, many students say the police are to blame.
It's really bad, because President Torra criticized the sentences and then sends the Catalan police, the Mossos d'Esquadra, to repress those who are fighting against the sentences. This is a super hypocritical, and what we demand is the resignation of the Catalan Interior Minister, Miguel.
The president's speech was terrible. They want to demobilize us. We need leaders. We do not have leaders. They do not support us.
Israeli forces have fired tear gas and rubber bullets at Palestinians protesting against land seizures for Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. According to eyewitnesses, dozens of the protesters were injured in the village Tumus Aya. Israeli protesters also gathered on a hill opposite to call on the government to build a new settlement. The Israeli government's expansion of Jewish settlements has blocked any peace talks for several years. 5 years ago, China declared war on environmental pollution, and everything seems to indicate that it is winning. The Asian giant is advancing at a record speed in reducing and mitigating pollution.
In the last 3 years, the country reduced by more than half its emissions of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide from power plants. These are the components that contribute most to the harmful smog.
Anyone who has visited Beijing or other Chinese cities in recent years will really notice the improvement in the climate, in the air quality of the city. Although pollution persists, now we have bluer skies, and it's something we have to keep working on.
According to a specialized study, the Asian giant could meet its ultra-low emissions targets for 2020, which will mean considerable health benefits for its citizens.
The Chinese government has taken many measures to control pollution in the country, from stopping polluting factories to promoting clean energy sources, such as the use of electric vehicles. For me, this is a very important issue, because we have a lot of people and this affects our health.
Addressing environmental pollution is currently a priority for the Chinese government, which this year will invest nearly $4 billion in preventing and controlling pollution.
Beijing is still one of the most polluted cities in the world, but I think in a few years that will change. It's my hope to be able to breathe cleaner and cleaner air.
China, which embarked on its course to become a major power long after other countries, has even sacrificed part of its rate of development to deal with climate change. It's an issue which is now just as important as economic growth or the fight against poverty.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.